Welcome to today's Explainer. We're taking a journey through the dark, neon-lit streets of modern music history to look at a figure who fundamentally changed how the night sounds. But we are beginning on a very somber note today. We're stepping into the cinematic, brilliant, and ultimately heartbreaking story of Vincent Belorgey, the French electronic icon, known to the world simply as Kavinsky. Today, we aren't just reporting the tragic news of his sudden passing, we're really here to celebrate a legacy. We're going to break down how a kid from the Parisian suburbs turned electronic music into pure cinema, and how his aesthetic continues to define a generation.
Okay, let's dive into this. Just listen to how his fans described him. The ghost behind the windshield, the soundtrack to a million midnight drives. I mean, that isn't just poetry, it's a dead-on description of the mythos Kavinsky created. You know that feeling when you hear a heavy, pulsing synth bass line mixed with a distant rumble of an engine? You almost immediately picture dark city streets and rain hitting a windshield, right? Kavinsky didn't just write songs, he scored a movie that existed entirely in his own head, pulling all of us into the passenger seat. But before we explore the incredible highs of that midnight drive, we need to address the tragic reality that brings us here today.
Sadly, the music world was plunged into darkness on July 28, 2026, when Vincent Belorgey was found dead at his home in Paris. He was just days away from celebrating his 51st birthday. Authorities investigating the scene found no suspicious elements, and initial reports point to a possible stroke, especially since he had been complaining of severe headaches for several days beforehand. It's just a sudden, truly shocking loss of a visionary artist who, as we'll see, had just recently reached unimaginable new peaks in his career.
To really understand the gravity of this loss, we have to look at the alter ego he created, the zombie driver. Born in the suburbs of Paris, Vincent was a kid totally obsessed with cinema, particularly 80s horror and cop films. So, when he emerged in the early 2000s Parisian underground scene, he decided he couldn't just be another DJ standing behind a laptop. He crafted this entire character. According to the myth he built, Kavinsky was a teenager who crashed his father's classic 80s Ferrari Testarossa, only to return as an immortal zombie driver, forever stuck behind the wheel, never aging, just always cruising. And this persona? It shifted him from a mere musician into a living, breathing cinematic character.
Now, what's really interesting about this is when you break down his musical DNA compared to his famous contemporaries, a stark contrast emerges. Kavinsky came up in that legendary French touch movement, opening for giants like Daft Punk and rubbing shoulders with Justice and Sebastian. But whereas peers like Daft Punk and Justice were taking disco-infused house music and looking forward to the future of dance clubs, Kavinsky was decidedly looking backward. He was pulling from the heavy, gated reverb, synth-drenched sounds of 80s composers like John Carpenter and Jan Hammer. He actively chose retrofuturism over modern club trends, and that's exactly what made his sound so entirely distinctive.
So looking at his career timeline, it's a fascinating, kind of sporadic journey. He begins in the early 2000s in that Parisian underground. But the massive inflection point hits in 2010 and 2011 with the release of Nightcall. Following that monumental success, he famously goes quiet. I mean, he takes over a decade before his 2022 album Reborn finally ends the hiatus. Then he hits a global pinnacle at the 2024 Paris Olympics, which brings us to the tragic end in 2026. This trajectory shows us a guy who definitely wasn't chasing relentless yearly album cycles. He worked entirely on his own time, which, let's be honest, only added to the mystique of the character. Let's zoom in on that 2011 turning point.
The alchemy that happened in 2011 absolutely cannot be overstated. Director Nicholas Winding Refn took Kavinsky's minimalist, haunting track Nightcall and dropped it right into the heart of the opening credits for his film Drive. The pairing was just literal perfection. You had the neon red lights of Los Angeles, that iconic hot pink cursive font, and the stoic intensity of Ryan Gosling behind the wheel, all of it scored by Kavinsky's hypnotic synth stabs and vocoder vocals. Suddenly, he wasn't just a niche French artist anymore, he became the international headliner of modern noir. That single cultural moment basically ignited the entire global retro-futuristic synthwave movement.
So, the crucial point is, following up a track that literally defined a genre brings immense pressure, and that led to a notorious, years-long silence. But in 2022, he finally broke that silence with his album Reborn. And actually, this wasn't just some nostalgic sequel, it was a profound evolution of his art. He used this album to explore really mature themes of memory, loss, and the passage of time. Tracks like Zenith and Renegade proved for sure that he wasn't just a one-hit wonder who got lucky with a movie soundtrack. It demonstrated his perfectionism, beautifully blending his signature retro sound with modern electronic beats and cementing his status as an atmospheric visionary.
And you know, that careful, visionary approach set the perfect stage for his absolute greatest mainstream triumph just 2 years before his death. Picture this. It's the closing ceremony of the 2024 Paris Olympics. The eyes of the entire planet are on the French capital. Kavinsky takes the stage to perform an epic, live orchestral remix of Nightcall, joined by the brilliant Belgian singer Angèle and the legendary French band Phoenix. It was just a breathtaking spectacle. It brought his underground, midnight sound directly into the living rooms of billions of people globally. It was this massive celebration of French electronic music, proving exactly how timeless his art had become.
To put this scale of his mainstream resurgence into perspective, following that performance, Nightcall became the #1 most Shazam song in a single day in the entire history of the app. History! The sheer reach of this moment is just mind-blowing. People who weren't even born when the song first dropped or when Drive came out were suddenly scrambling for their phones to figure out what this incredible music was. It cemented a moment of immense national pride for France and proved, without a doubt, that Kavinsky's music had captivated an entirely new generation.
But then, the shockwaves of his sudden death just weeks later were immediate and profound. You can really gauge the reverence he commanded by the words of French President Emmanuel Macron, who paid tribute by calling him a source of French pride forever. I mean, to have the leader of the nation speak about an electronic music producer in such esteemed terms, it shows you that Kavinsky wasn't just making club tracks. He was creating vital, culturally significant art that resonated deeply within the identity of his home country.
And this brilliantly illustrates the immense cultural void his passing leaves behind. Culture Minister Catherine Pigard noted that France has lost one of its most unique voices, highlighting that his work was both danceable and nostalgic, which, if you think about it, is a really difficult balance to strike as an artist. Across the global electronic music community, peers poured out their disbelief, remembering him for his humble, almost obsessive dedication to his craft. For him, it was never about the fame, it was all about the feeling, the atmosphere, and getting that aesthetic exactly right, no matter how long it took.
Kavinsky himself once said that he wanted his music to sound like a car crash you can't look away from. And he achieved exactly that. He demanded your attention. He took the aggressive, cold, mechanical sounds of the synthesizer and somehow made them bleed with human emotion and cinematic drama. Vincent Belorgey successfully became the cool, mysterious, and infinitely stylish sound of the night. He basically gave us an aesthetic that we can step right into whenever we put on our headphones.
Which leaves us with a pretty poignant question. If Kavinsky was the sound of the night, how is the dark going to sound without its greatest driver? Vincent Belorgey may have driven off into the dark much too soon, but the legacy he leaves behind is absolutely bulletproof. The engine he built will never stop running. The music remains a permanent fixture of our midnight drives. The night calls, and thanks to Kavinsky, we will always know exactly how to answer. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep exploring, and I'll catch you next time.